One thing we get a lot of here in terms of narcissism in this YouTube channel is questions. And something I'm going to be focusing on a lot this year is answering your questions on this YouTube channel. So send them in, and you can send them in through social media, whatever. We'll be finding different ways to getting them from you. But here's one that has come up over and over again. Many times when you ask questions, especially when 50 of you ask the same question, those are certainly going to be the ones I want to answer. But here we go. Here's a question that someone sent in. So let's take this one on. So the question here is, it's being asked by a parent. And the person says, I am a parent of either an adult narcissistic child who is keeping me away from my grandchildren, or my child's spouse, who I suspect might be narcissistic, is keeping me away from my grandchild, and the parent is quite antagonistic. What do I do? Okay? So this is a tricky issue. I'm going to start from the feeling that most people would feel under these circumstances, which is grief. And the grief over the loss of, again, it could be, I think many parents who have adult narcissistic children feel tremendous grief, because not only is there a lot of self-blame, there's also a sense of you're missing out on a relationship that you really, really wanted to have with your adult child. And then when they had children, you may have had a whole rich set of beliefs of how desperately you wanted to be part of grandchildren's lives. You might even have moved after retirement to live closer to this adult child so you could be part of their family's lives. And then it really becomes their narcissism or antagonism and all the other stuff comes clear, you're like, oh boy, I will not be able to see these grandchildren. And in fact, your adult narcissistic child may actually use their children as a tool of manipulation to punish you, to withhold them, all of that. And there's almost nothing else in the world that could hurt you more than you're seeing that these little people that you want to spend time with are being kept from you. This can really sting if it is the person that they married, so your son or daughter-in-law, for example. And what can happen then is that you then feel as though, gosh, had this story gone differently, my kid is fine, but you almost feel as though you watch them kind of get lost into this narcissistic relationship. And if you did ever point out like, oh, I think this person, I hope you never do this. And if you haven't done this, don't do this. Try to point out to them that their spouse is narcissistic. That's usually not met well, but it could very well be that this person as their spouse has a hell of a lot more say over them. And then that spouse, that narcissistic spouse, trying to isolate your child, will then view you as somebody they want to isolate the child from, and then you may not be able to spend time with your grandchildren, okay? So the grief tends to be the leading kind of an issue. I want to put in here, though, a disclaimer, okay? Any of you watching this video, you're going to have to be brutally honest with yourself, right? To say, why is it my kid wants nothing to do with me or have me have nothing to do with my grandchildren? Only you know the answer in the sense of the reality of, did something bad happen? Is there some reason, something very real that happened that they would not trust you? And sometimes it can feel incredibly, incredibly unfair. The most unfair version of that is that you might, for example, have remained married to, you yourself may not be narcissistic, but you remained married to a narcissistic parent who did them tremendous harm. And they partly hold you responsible for that. And so as a result, have distance from the two of you. That could be one reason this happened. Again, this is going to be different in all of your stories. It could very well be that you yourself had a tough time, and as you might have gone through your own therapy and work and said, okay, I'm in a better place now, but your child only remembered that part of their childhood. So you do have to be very clear on what might have happened. It's also conceivable, and this is the most painful version of all, is that you were, the other parent of this adult child is narcissistic and filled that child's head with all kinds of terrible information about you and listened to it and believed it. And so their reason for distancing from you is based on the BS that your, I imagine in most of your cases, ex-partner might have shared with your adult child, and maybe even shared it with them when they were kids. And that's why the adult child is turning away. So there can be a complicated backdrop to why this is happening. But in a way, whatever that backdrop is, you're left in this position now of having what feels like either an antagonistic child or their spouse is antagonistic or narcissistic, and now you can't get to your grandchildren. One of the hardest pieces is if you have any in with the kids, like if you're able to see these grandchildren, is to make that time matter. Because an antagonistic, narcissistic adult child or their spouse, they are holding the keys to the kingdom, right? They have the ultimate way to manipulate you. So when you do have that time, it's all about back to radical acceptance and realistic expectations. You may have all of an afternoon. So make the most of that time, but also be at the ready that it could end like that for whatever capricious reason that your child or their spouse wants to say, okay, fun's over, sort of thing. And pushing back and fighting them on it will probably get you nowhere. Remember, you're not going to hold legal rights in most cases the way that a parent would. You know, if they say they're going to sleep over and then they roll in at 4 o'clock and say, we decided that that's not going to be it. It's to hopefully have made every minute up till 4 o'clock work and not get into a fight with them. One thing to always remember, whether it's your adult child, your spouse, your family member, once you get into it with a narcissistic person, it becomes a dog with a bone thing, and they're going to fight the fight. They're going to pull the kids away just because. So to the degree you're not resisting that, as hard as it may be, you may have even traveled to spend a weekend with grandchildren and get all of 3 hours. But if you're playing a long game, not going there becomes very important. Another thing to remember, and this is a tough one, is to follow the rules that the parents have for their children, assuming that they're safe rules, right? They might seem excessive about foods the child can or can't eat, or what activities that the kid can interact in, or can they watch TV or not. You may not agree with them, but follow them. Because remember, when you do have a narcissistic adult child, or that adult child has a narcissistic spouse, they're looking for you to sort of cross that line, right? So follow those rules as much as you're like, oh gosh, I just wanted to bake chocolate chip cookies, but we're not going to be doing that. Follow their rules. I know it sounds like you're like, really? I feel like I'm enabling them. Remember what the prize here, the true north, is to spend time with those grandchildren. You want to be good to your grandchildren, but you don't want to be too good. So you don't want it to be too spoily, because frankly, at this point, it has nothing to do with the parents, rules or no rules. It can confuse the grandkids too. It's almost like too much. So it's really almost figuring out what it is that matters to this kid. Maybe there's a particular park they like to go to, or coloring or art or something they like to do. Make the focus that, rather than, I got to squeeze it all in. It's about making that time matter, not by trying to do a laundry list of 50 things all at once, because you don't get to see these kids that often, but really paying attention to like almost meeting these kids on their rhythm, because you know odds are it's going to get thwarted or something strange is going to happen. Something else you want to keep in mind, because not all of you may live near these grandchildren. And again, absolutely devastating when you travel to go see these kids. You might travel across the country or even to another country to see them, and get there and get all of 6 hours with them when you thought you might get 2 weeks. But however which way you can, stay in touch with these kids. It's a lot harder when they're younger, obviously. You might send cards that are never given to them and never opened. You may, they may not, hand a video call to the child, whatever it may be. As the child gets older, it may be more viable that you can do that. But try to stay in touch with these kids. Like I said, you don't want to send them a letter every day. That might be a bit much. But while there is a way, it might be that you see them and you're not going to see them for another 6 months. Maybe there's like a letter each week, or there's something that you find, some way you find out so you can do with the child, especially as they get older, where it allows you to kind of keep a steady line in their life. But again, you don't want it to be excessive. And above all else, you don't want it to become a power struggle with that narcissistic parent or parents, because the minute you go there, that's going to turn into, well, then you don't get to talk to them at all. And your goal is to maintain some level of contact with them. Some of you may say, you know what, I had worked hard and I had saved hard, and I really wanted to ensure I gave my grandchildren a leg up. If that's the case, and if you want to do this kind of giving to them, this could be college fund, it could be money put in trust, money that they could use for travel, do it. Create it. I mean, hopefully at some point you're able to get this child's social security number, because I do think you need that. So like, make sure you get that information as soon as you can early in the child's life. And then go ahead in whatever way it feels comfortable for you. Set up what you want to leave to that child. You may even very well engage in estate planning where you say, my narcissistic adult child or their narcissistic spouse, I am not funding their lives, but I really would love to give an advantage to my grandchild. There you'd want to meet with a wills and trust attorney to make sure that whatever you set up, maybe that you use a trustee that's not the parents, so that decisions could be made about this money, but they're not going through the parents, and there's no likelihood that the parents could co-opt that. Again, this gets into uncomfortable stuff, but some people might say, okay, what little time I did get with them, at least I want to make sure that the grandchildren are okay, but I have very little interest in now at this point funding the life of my adult narcissistic child. You have to also know what your limits are in terms of there's only so much debasement any of us could tolerate, right? So you may be desperate to see these grandchildren, but it may be the hoop jumping and the rules of engagement and the rules of entry are something that are starting to make you feel sick. Only you know what that line is, or what's being asked of you is reasonable, or even if it feels extortionate. So you may be more than willing to meet them, way more than halfway, but understand what that limit is and find people and places you can talk about it. It could be therapy, it could be friends who are maybe going through their own tensions with their adult children and grandchildren, but have sounding boards, because sometimes the way children are used, grandchildren are used, I should say, can actually be quite terrible. And like I said, literally extortionate. You want to spend time with them? Well, then do this, this, and this. But you have to also be aware that, again, you can't push yourself into a place of unsafety. What you don't want to do is, especially as we get older, life gets very expensive. If you need care or anything like that, that you want to make sure that you don't get yourself into a situation where you're offering financial support or other support that you cannot afford to give, just in the hope of seeing these grandchildren more often, and then may be left in a completely untenable situation that that adult narcissistic child or their partner are not going to help with. A really big one to remember, though, is to never speak badly of the child's parents to them ever, ever. You may be as frustrated as hell about what these parents have done and want to say, you're the reason. And the child might even ask you a very innocent question like, how come you weren't at my birthday party? And you want to say, because your B-word of a mother wouldn't let me come, but you're not going to say that. Instead, you're going to say, I am so sorry I could not have made it. Some things happened. You don't have to you don't have to lie. Like, a bunch of things happened and I wasn't able to come, and I'm so sorry because I saw the pictures and it looked like so much fun and I'd love to celebrate it now, but inside your heart is breaking because you knew that the only place in the world you wanted to be was at that birthday party. However, to speak ill of the child's parents only confuses the child, especially, believe it or not, the child might have a decent relationship with their parents, that the real friction is happening between their parent and you. So you don't get to talk badly about their parents to them ever. Not even as they climb into adulthood. It's too confusing. It's conceivable as your grandchild is an adult, and if you're fortunate, you get to spend time with an adult grandchild, and that adult grandchild might say, whatever they feel about their parent, and it may be congruent with your experience of that parent or either parents or both parents' narcissism. But even then, you can let the kid talk, empathize, tell them that you're sorry, that there were some really rough times. But I think that a grandparent, more than almost anyone, it's not that you say, no, your parents were great, they loved you. You don't want to gaslight the kid. But you also don't want to be the one who's piling on. You can say, that sounded really tough. Or you could even say, wow, that wasn't okay. I'm so sorry that happened. But that's very different than saying your mom or your dad is a terrible person. But ultimately, though, the key here are the realistic expectations and being prepared for disappointment, which is really hard. It's the radical acceptance piece. with adult narcissistic children, it might be the hardest piece of all, because like I said, a lot of parents feel like they take responsibility, they see where it came from. We always have hope in our children, something I've talked about on this channel before. But you may already suspect, even before your child had children, that like, oh, this is a tough personality. And the mistake many people make is like, well, maybe once they have kids, they'll know how hard it was for me. Quite the opposite's going to happen. They're more likely to say, well, look how right I'm doing it, and you totally screwed it up. So it's actually, you're not going to have the miraculous turnaround. And I've cautioned many, many, many grandparents who have said, I'm going to give it all up, and I'm going to go live near them, and I'm going to sell my house, and this and that. Be very careful before you upend your life to put yourself in a situation that you're already suspecting is not actually going to roll out the way you think. It becomes really important that you maintain elements of your life. In a way, it's a you can't win situation. If you attempt to engage, they're often going to use the grandchildren as a pawn. If you disengage a little, they're going to say, see, you're as disinterested in your grandkids as you were in me. Again, you can't win. It's sort of the mantra of the narcissistic relationship. But this question came up from a lot of people because, again, there's narcissistic people out there, right? More than a few of them. Well, all of those people are someone's child. And if it's your case that that's happening and there are grandchildren involved, it can really be devastating because not only are you dealing with the fallout of having had, of dealing with an adult narcissistic child and the risks and all of that are there, and the strong emotions and the feelings and the grief, but now a relationship that, especially as you come into the latter years of your life, that you were really looking forward to watching a new generation grow up and feeling as though that was something that was taken away from you, you can have strong emotional reactions on your side. The key is to not let those get the better of you, to use all the frameworks we know about narcissism to help inform how you interact here, to make the most of whatever moments you've got, to gird yourself for the disappointments, and to not have false hope, because that could get very, very costly, to protect those kids from any negative talk about their parents, much as I know it's hard to do, and ensuring that you have supports and a place to take this, including therapy, because this is actually territory we often don't talk a lot about when it comes to narcissistic relationships, and yet it can be something that's really devastating at a stage in life where people don't always feel that they have the same level of bandwidth or support that they need, and there's much, much less talked about and less information there. So I hope this gives you some introduction to that. None of this is easy, but being very, very careful and in essence doing the most you can with the moments you've got and not getting into the power struggles is often the win. So wishing you luck with that, and thanks again.